You see many different viewpoints, and that's not what we want. We should be able to allow that conversation outside of science. And I will end on that note. Thank you.
Finally, for the proposition side, we have Mr. Dan Elliott. Dan is the English-speaking pastor at a Korean church. He is also a professor of human communication at Biola University, where he directs the speech and the debate team.
As was said, I am the coach of the speech and debate team at Biola University, and you came here to see a debate. So what I'd like to do is provide you immediately, rather than with an opening statement, but some actual clash with some of the statements that were made by our esteemed colleagues. Let me first begin. Eric Twisselman began his speech today by setting out a clear proposition. We are not trying to say that a particular religion is to be taught within the public schools. We are not, in fact, trying to say that all religions are supposed to be taught within the public schools. What, in fact, we are trying to say is that God, or a creator, or an intelligent designer, has legitimate scientific argumentation and should be presented as an alternative to pure naturalism. This has not quite been contested. The contests that Brenda brings up against these charges are twofold. Number one, she says that we want to have our cake and eat it too, and creates an analogy in order to say that it would be ludicrous for the federal government, in order to establish rules by which we harmonize evolution inside Sunday school classes, and says, in effect, that evolution should stay within the classroom at public schools, creation myths should stay within churches. I would argue that this analogy is not quite accurate. In fact, her argumentation states that there is this two-way wall preventing religion from entering into the public sector and preventing the public sector from entering into religion. Her support for that comes back essentially to Thomas Jefferson's claim of a wall separating the church from the state. This was a letter that he wrote to a church, but the letter was not intended in order to prevent the church from interacting with the federal government. In fact, quite the opposite. It was a letter written to ensure that the federal government was to stay out of the affairs of the church. In fact, our founding fathers, such as Jefferson, Franklin, Madison, Adams, and George Washington himself, all believed that religion specifically needed to have its place within the public sector. That it was absolutely critical that in order to have moral and proper leaders, that they were well-versed in terms of morality, that they were well-versed in terms of a biblical ethic. This is not a two-way wall. It is, in fact, a one-way wall to prevent a state religion from dominating the churches in our culture. But religion was always to be encouraged, and it was never to be excluded from the public schools. In fact, the founder of the First Amendment, by which we get this, was a man by the name of Isaac Backus. He was a pastor of a Baptist church. He wanted religion to be free, to be exercised in any way that that church saw fit. He did not want the state to dictate those rules, but he wanted the church to have influence within the state. So the proposition that she says is not quite accurate. In fact, the unconstitutional claims, the unconstitutional challenges that she brings up, the 15 times that the Supreme Court has decided to strike down any form of religious involvement within the public schools, is, according to her, a way to say that we cannot focus on every faith. And since we can't focus on every faith, we shouldn't focus on any faith. I would say that she's absolutely correct. We should not be trying to focus on faith inside a science classroom, but we should focus on logic. And logic dictates that there is an intelligent designer. Let me give you a few arguments. Kalam cosmological's argument states that everything began to exist, had a cause. The universe began to exist, so the universe must have a cause. This syllogism is very difficult to challenge, and in fact, if given time, I'd like to explain that further. Additionally, there's the argument for design. You have cells, such as the flagellum, which could not possibly have evolved in order to reach its external motor. It needed to be designed. And if there is a design, there must be a designer. These are, in fact, logical arguments that we would like taught and proposed within the public schools, not teaching any and all creation myths.
To conclude our opening statements, I'd like to invite the last speaker on the opposition side, Derek Keepers, who's been a special education teacher for 5 years, currently teaching at Altaloma High School. Before teaching, he served as the Director of Christian Education and Youth Ministry at Pilgrim Congregational Church in Pomona, and he is also the founder of swapserve.com, a community service website I would invite you all to check out after the debate.
Josh? Creationism should not be taught in schools funded by the government. The freedom of religion implies the pursuit of the religious faith you choose from a base that the government has done nothing to influence. This necessitates that a person be able to go through life without ever being forced to learn the tenets of a religion, and frankly, being able to ignore it completely if he or she chooses. In terms of science and history classes, the inclusion of an untested, unevidenced working hypothesis such as creationism implies a superiority of the concept, especially when juxtaposed with a semester full of evidence-based scientific laws and historical facts. Finally, the inclusion of creationism in the curriculum undermines the scientific method at the stage when it is first being introduced to students. The notion that you must challenge a guess about reality with experiments, evidence, and peer review for any scientific assertion to be considered true is at the core of the subject of science. But the idea that we can stop at the guess when it comes to the origin of life, perhaps our most important scientific and historical question, is a profoundly irresponsible lesson to teach kids, and at very least undermines the basic precepts of the classes in which the proposition suggests they learn it. Let's talk about this freedom to pursue or ignore religion for a minute. A fundamental component of civil rights is one's right not to exercise them. That is why we don't have compulsory voting, because not saying something is saying something. The freedom of speech is not the obligation. Freedom of religion does not imply an obligation to research or even be aware of it. One has the right to isolate oneself if he or she so chooses, even if, and especially when, his or her opinion is unpopular. After all, these rights weren't written because the majority desperately needed defending. I said earlier that creationism should not be taught in science courses because the inclusion of an untested working hypothesis such as creationism implies a superiority of the concept when juxtaposed with a semester full of evidence-based laws. The first lesson in your basic life science class is the scientific method, and that it is required for scientific concepts to be considered, well, scientific. Even if it is included, though, will the classification of creationism really help the creationist cause? It is not evidence-based, so it doesn't fit into the category of scientific law, scientific theory, or even a standard hypothesis, which is established based on general corroborating facts. It would have to fall into the category of working hypothesis, which is a proposition set forth and asserted merely as a provisional conjecture. If we follow this classification system, creationists would likely not be very happy with being placed in the category of a working hypothesis. Finally, the inclusion of creationism in the curriculum undermines the scientific method at the stage when it is first being introduced. The strength of the scientific method is that it is universally applicable and required in science. Teaching creationism would be like running a sex ed class and saying, having sex causes pregnancy. Some people believe that you can't get pregnant on the first time, but there's no evidence for that. If there's no evidence, but it's still mentioned, it implies legitimacy on par with the legitimacy of the other concepts presented. Asking a teacher to teach something that has no evidence to back it up amongst other concepts that have required a lot of evidence for their inclusion in the curriculum implies that there is something more superior in that idea that requires it to be included. The creationism working hypothesis should not be taught in schools funded by the government because the context and implications of its inclusion are tantamount to state-sponsored religion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Derek. This leads us to the next section of our debate. Judging by the looks on the faces of the debaters, things have been said that the side opposite you that you might have taken objection to. Here's your chance to raise those objections. Is there anybody who would like to start off the process?
All right, this question is for anyone who would like to answer. Would you consider any of the following as valid scientific research programs? Okay, any of the following. Number one, the proposition that conscious individuals besides myself exist. Number two, that archaeology is a legitimate scientific study, that is the study of human artifacts can be used as evidence to prove the existence of people we can't actually see now. Third, the existence of black holes. And fourth, the scientific research program funded, I believe, by the federal government known as the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, known as SETI. Do any, all, some, or none of those qualify as scientific research programs? Yes or no?
So I'm going to take a stab at this, and I'm going to say that I think you're simplifying the arguments too much by asking if all of these qualify as scientific programs. What we're looking at is not if we can teach SETI in public schools. We're not saying that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence is going to be taught in schools. And also,
this question goes to the
archaeology.
This question goes to the heart of the philosophy of science, and your answer is going to give me a good idea of what your philosophy of testable science is, and that has been asserted by both you and Mr. Keepers. So I'm interested as to whether or not these qualify as scientific research programs.
They can qualify as scientific research programs within the idea that they're using testable hypotheses to find that, which I last checked, creationism and intelligent design and science courses don't. And also those are faith-based, and faith-based requires you to unquestionably accept them.
Okay.
With these, though, they don't force children in public schools to learn about archaeology. Last time I checked, it's not part of any life science or biology course.
You mean archaeology is never appealed to in history?
Archaeology would be appealed to in a history class if you can say we can have records showing that somebody was here at this time, and so we can say here's records and here's this, but there's a number of different evidence. We don't just say, oh, and this book says it, and we can only trust this book right here.
Okay.
The Essenes wrote it, and we don't know much about them, but yeah.
Here's where I'm going with this. Would you agree that all four of those examples that I gave each rely on a method of inference to best explanation?
Could you repeat that last thing?
Would you agree that all four examples that I gave you all rely, as scientific research programs, on an inference to the best explanation from empirical evidence? That is, they reason to a conclusion that is not directly scientifically, empirically observable.
While there is a preponderance for a need for empirical evidence, and some of these don't necessarily follow that route to find the best answers. For example, SETI doesn't have entirely empirical evidence. They're searching because they hope they can find something.
Don't they proceed on the presupposition that if we were to get some sort of mathematical Morse code from a higher intelligent being, that we would have the intelligence to discern the difference between that and radiostatic?
While I would hope that they have the ability to discern the intelligence.
Otherwise, we're flushing money down the toilet, right?
Well, my thing is, like I said, I think we're avoiding the original argumentation, and we're not forcing children in public schools to be subjected to this. So that, I think, is wherein the real question lies. So that's my ultimate answer to that.
Good. If the opposition side would like to ask a question on the same topic or change the focus of the Q&A, here's your opportunity.
Yeah. One of the topics that really hasn't been touched on is the proposition side continues to say that intelligent design is something that can be proved. How can intelligent design be something that is provable? What is your evidence other than we exist, therefore there is a God?
There are a number of proofs for the existence of a God or an intelligent designer. I mentioned two. Kalam's cosmological argument. Everything began to exist had a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe was caused. Those premises have yet to be refuted. For example, the universe began to exist. Everyone says it began to exist. The question is whether or not you believe it was caused or it was uncaused. We say that everything began to exist had a cause. Because do things just pop into existence? Nobody lives that way. How many of you live in deathly fear that sometime tonight an elephant is going to materialize out of nothing over your bed and crush you in your sleep? We believe that there are things that will come into being for a reason. Therefore, everything that began to exist was caused. The universe began to exist. We say that the universe started somehow. The question is, did it start without the cause, as in a big bang from some cosmic string? Or did it begin because someone actually set it in motion? If those two premises are accepted, that the universe, that everything began to exist has a cause, and that the universe began to exist, then it's logical to conclude that the universe was caused. Second, the argument of design. The design argument states that if information somehow exists within the simplest of organisms, such as a cell, or the most complex organism, such as a man, that information does not just happen by sheer random chance, but actually there was a creator that gave said information. For example, within the human body, or within the human code, there is enough genetic material and information there to fill up all the books in all the library of all the world. If I were to simply dump out a bunch of letters, like Scrabble letters, on the table, and it just showed random letters, then we would say there's no information. But if all of a sudden that random letters began to create a word that said, "Hello, my name is," well, how many times would I have to dump out the Scrabble box in order for that to happen? The odds of probability are so high against that from ever occurring that we would say the fact that it said, "Hello, my name is," would be an argument that someone with intelligence placed those Scrabble letters in that order.
Is there a follow-up question from the opposition side on that?
I'd like to just respond, if that's all right.
Yeah.
In terms of the idea of the information existing inside the cell and inside the human and so forth, without getting too simple, it seems that the argument that the universe is just really, 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 really awesome is not a logical argument. It really, really awesome, therefore it must have been an intelligent design, is not that logical. And also, as far as the cause, the universe was caused, therefore there's intelligence. Cause does not imply intelligence. A tree falls over in the forest because the wind caused it to fall over. No one stood there and pushed it and said, "Okay, wind, time to go blow that tree down." Cause does not imply intelligence, and there's no argument that I know, at least, or that I've heard from your side that says cause and intelligence are dependent on each other.
Is there a response from proposition?
Yes, I do. Derek, I think your question was very good, actually, because it leads us to ask what exactly is intelligent design. And that's a longer explanation than I think we're going to be allowed to give right now. But I'll just say that intelligent design, like evolutionary theory, is a theory. And in science, a theory is an explanation. It's very large. It's made up of laws and contentions and accepted facts that are revisable, may be changed. But it's a theory. It's a way of explanation. By theory in science, we don't mean it's just a guess. We mean it's a way of explaining things. And you're right. Just saying the universe is really, really awesome is not an argument. I agree with that. But in intelligent design, one way of looking, let's say, at what's going on in the molecular machinery of a cell, perhaps the synthesis of a protein. This has actually been done in intelligent design research. Biochemists look at what are the odds of this particular protein being formed, given what we know about the cellular machinery right now, about the biochemistry of the cell. And we know so much more than Darwin did. To Darwin, the cell was a black box. It was just a lump of cytoplasm, and what went on inside of it was life, but he didn't have any idea of it, nor did anyone else in his day and age. Today we have a good idea of it. So here's one way that intelligent design research could be done. We look at a structure of a cell, like a flagellum, or a synthesis of a protein, and as much as we can, we put odds on what is the chance of this developing by evolutionary theory, a random natural chance, a random rather chance naturalistic explanation. And when this is done, in some of the research I've read, the odds are enormous that this happened by random chance naturalistic processes. By enormous, I mean things like 1 in 10 to the 100th, like more than there are particles in the whole universe. And at that point, since it's an explanation, a theory, you must ask a person, what seems more reasonable to you? That this developed by, and just one protein here, this developed by random chance naturalistic processes, or somebody cooked the books, something happened, it almost cries out for some kind of outside push, some kind of manufacture or design. And that's when you talk about proving intelligent design, we don't prove it because it's a theory. It's much larger than one simple law. In the same way, we don't prove evolutionary theory, but we see what is best supported. And at some point, a scientist has to look at that, and I'm about to bring the word faith into this, and say, which one seems more believable to me? Which one seems more plausible? If it's 1 out of 10 to the 100th, am I so committed to evolutionary theory that I'm going to have the faith that it happened by random chance naturalistic processes? Or does this idea of intelligent design suggest itself to me so strongly that I'm willing to explore that? So that's what I'd say, how you prove it. I don't want to use the word prove, because we don't prove a theory like that. We support it, we modify it, but that's how you would prove intelligent design or support intelligent design theory.
Thank you, Mark. It seems that these questions are dealing a lot with the idea of whether or not creationism is scientifically testable, but a large part of the debate also dealt with the idea of rights analysis and constitutionality. I'd like to move the Q&A towards that topic, and I think, Brenna, the challenge was made to your speech by the side opposite you that says that while religion shouldn't be influenced by the government, that religion can indoctrinate itself or include itself in social and governmental spheres. Would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm having a tough time hearing. I get a lot of background sounds. Could you repeat that actually before I just...
Your claim was that science and that government and politics and the public sphere should be separated by a two-way wall, as it was put by the proposition side. Whereas they say that actually the Constitution was written in such a manner where religion is actually allowed to influence public sectors and, in our case, specifically public schools. Could you respond to that claim?
Oh, yes. The idea of this two-way wall and how they argue, actually, it's one-way wall, and I believe the reference to Jefferson's wall letter was brought into play. The reason